Welcome to Humans of Reliability, the podcast dedicated to understanding the complexity and opportunities in the world of developer experience and reliability. I'm Sylvain Kalache, Head of Developer Relations at Rootly, and your host for this podcast. Today I'm joined by Chase Roberts, COO at Northflank. Northflank is a self-service developer platform that automates and unifies deployment of any workload on any cloud at any scale. Chase dived into why PaaS got right and what it got wrong, and why the industry moved away from it to adopt platform engineering. He explores the common pitfall of platform engineering and why the industry needs to rethink the build versus buy debate. We'll explore how to balance simplicity with developer flexibility, the cultural shift necessary for successful platform adoption, and why modern developer platform could finally fulfill Kubernetes' goal of workload portability across clouds. If you are looking to understand how platforms can empower developers rather than constrain them, what Crescent and platform engineering have in common, and why giving power back to the people matters more than ever, this conversation is for you. Let's jump in. So Chase, PaaS promised us very easy push-button simplicity, yet many organizations moved a long time ago. So what did PaaS fail to fulfill, and how do you believe platform engineering is filling those gaps?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's start with what PaaS got right. And the thing that PaaS, or the platforms as a service, got right was fundamentally the focus on developer experience. What are developers actually here to do? They just want to ship workloads, get those running in cloud infrastructure, and not have to worry about the underlying complexity. And some of the pioneers, with like Heroku and Cloud Foundry, I think really nailed like that vision. But the place that a lot of PaaSes didn't succeed, or the thing that they got wrong, was the ability to support multiple different types of workloads. So workload complexity. And then, for a lot of these companies, as they think about like adopting a PaaS, they have this trade-off that they have to contend with, which is, hey, on day one, this is great because I can just get going really easily and, trust that the solution is just going to kind of hide some of the complexity and make it possible for me to ship workloads. But they do so knowing that, in kind of the back of their head, there's this going to be this day where they're going to have to graduate, quote unquote, off of the PaaS and, rebuild everything and kind of build their, adopt cloud infrastructure, lower level cloud infrastructure from like AWS or GCP, et cetera. And that's largely what we've seen with a lot of PaaS players, right? Companies adopt them, to get stuff going very easily, but then they outgrow them. And then I would say the other thing that PaaS solutions failed to get right was the idea of bring your own cloud. AWS and GCP and Azure and Oracle and all the managed cloud providers have piled billions of dollars of resources into making, very scalable, resilient infrastructure. And so trying to reinvent that and kind of take the nice economics of being able to contract directly with them away from customers, I think is a bit of a challenge. Most companies want workloads running in their own clouds. And so I think that the other thing that a lot of PaaS solutions missed was really just this idea around bring your own cloud.
What's interesting is that you went directly with the term workload versus application. And I think also one other thing that PaaS focused on and did well to a certain degree was to host 12-factor apps. But there is actually way more than that, right? Like PaaS was like failing because once you wanted to run more than this, there were simply no options. So what type of workload do you see your customer running today? And which one, do you think should have the same frictionless deployment that wanted to offer?
It's so interesting because if you think about how people approach PaaS or the framing that people have for PaaSes in their heads are, these are the solutions for my ephemeral workloads. And whether that's a PaaS that they're buying off the shelf or whether it's something that's built internally, they think about it as like, oh, this is what I use to deploy my services. And you double click in a lot of companies and you ask like, okay, well, how do deployments work? Depending on the workload type, it's usually something like, well, for these services and these cloud endpoints, it's this set of infrastructure, this deployment path. But then if we're deploying it to this cloud or if it's like a database, we file a Jira ticket and someone does that for me. And I don't really know how that works. And realistically, an application is not just the ephemeral workloads. It's, some combination of my services, my databases, my scheduled workloads. And, from my point of view, and why I use the term workload, you need all of those working together and deployed and running in the cloud. And so it makes sense for us to treat all of them equally. And so really a workload is just anything that can be containerized, which includes databases and obviously includes scheduled workloads as well. So jobs.
Coming back to the point where you say that this giant cloud company builds its infrastructure to efficiently deploy workload at scale, I think platform engineering is a lot about this golden path, which are becoming increasingly complex, right? It's not just scalability and reliability, but today we're adding many layers like security and data compliance. You have more and more compliance law, after Europe started GDPR. So how do you see this web of complexity playing out for platform engineering teams?
There's not a perfect answer here because realistically, the tools that they have to manage this complexity aren't the best tools. And if you look at what's available, let's think about what it means to build a path of production. It means I need something for CI, I need something for my deployments, I need something for my day 2 operation. So, when I'm scaling my workloads and I, turning on backups and zero redundancy and things like that. The challenge is that all is, made up of a bunch of different tools and a bunch of different open source technologies. And then a lot of YAML, a lot of Terraform, a lot of custom code that only the authors who wrote it understand. And so when that is the set of building blocks that you have, like the complexity is always going to exist. And then, and then to layer on top of that, if I'm a DevOps team or a platform engineering team and I build this platform and I get everything starting to work, then I have the problem of giving my developers that quote unquote golden path that they can make sense of. So yes, I have this automated deployment path, but is it the right abstraction? Is it the right interface for my developers? Probably not. Like whenever we're talking to teams, if the platform initiative is somewhat mature and they're actually, getting all these tools working together nicely, and not too many people have left the company, so they always have to know the one person who understands the technology and how to make sure that this YAML file works a certain way. When you get to the developers, you're like, well, is it working? And they're like, well, I don't understand it. It's too complex. I spoke to an enterprise this morning that said to me, they're like, yeah, we've built the platform. It's amazing. We're so impressed with ourselves. We can't believe we pulled it off. It took us 3 years, but it takes 6 months for a developer to get to the point that they can use it because it's so complex to use. And you're like, what happened here? Right. And so fundamentally, it's an impossible task. It's almost a forlorn hope, which is the term that my CEO uses to describe this a little bit, which is like you're kind of doomed from the start because the tools that you have just aren't great. And so then it raises the question: why are we trying to reinvent the wheel every time with a platform? By starting with all of these low-level primitives and trying to assemble them to build the platform, and why not consider buying a solution? And so I think that turn is starting to happen when we're talking to buyers. They're like, look, our customers don't pay us to build platforms. We don't get to charge more for our banking app or our AI app, this, or our construction app or whatever. We don't get to charge more by investing, millions of dollars or thousands of dollars into a platform. We get to charge more when we ship great features. And any dollar spent on growing the platform and expanding that function just hurts margins. That's it. And it would be easier to justify if it wasn't such a big tax in our organization and our developers loved it and it worked. But realistically, that's not often the case. And this way, coming back to the idea of golden path to production, the problem starts to compound itself a little bit too, because we're also hearing more about multi-cloud. And I think for years, we'll call it, maybe if you talk to anyone, call it sooner than 4 years ago, and you say multi-cloud and people kind of laugh like, yeah, no one's really doing that. Now people are, right? And they might have one cloud that's the one that's most favorable, but they generally will have workloads running in multiple clouds within an organization, and some of that might be on-prem. And if you're building the deployment paths and focusing on building the platform for all the different clouds, it starts to look different depending on the cloud. And you make a change to, the logic in one of your platforms, and you just have to go and redo that over and over again for all the different, deployment endpoints. And that's kind of crazy. And it just becomes like a really, really hard task for teams, especially if you're trying to create a consistent golden path to production.
There's a lot to unpack in your answer. I want to use an analogy that you recently used on your LinkedIn, where you told the story of a business that wants to sell croissant. And you tell the story of this company that's getting entangled is in building the bakery instead of, and, like setting up the machine and setting up, everything that you need, like building the chair and everything. And at the end of the day, after a year, they still didn't like bake any of the croissant. So, I think that was a cool analogy, which I think reflects a lot of what you shared here. So you say that you believe companies should buy their internal platform, their IDP, instead of building one in-house. Do you think that applies all of the time? Or do you think there are times where they might be better off building? Like, what's your thought about that?
So if you're trying to decide whether it makes sense to build versus buy, I think there's probably 3 questions you would ask. First one is, does building the platform allow me to charge more for my products? I think that's going to be a tough one for anyone to walk through, because it's like saying, so for example, I work at a software infrastructure company. If you were to come to me and say like, hey, could you build your CRM? Like, yeah, we've got great developers. What is it? Just a database with a UI. But if I ask my engineers to work on building a CRM, does it allow me to charge more for my cloud infrastructure product? And the answer is no, right? It just means that there's time spent on that. That's not best spent on the core product. And the same thing is true for a bakery. We'll go back to that analogy. If the baker is spending all of his or her time trying to design the machinery so that way they can bake beautiful croissants, does that allow them to charge more for the croissants? The answer is no. It just means that there's time not spent on building a great product. So I think that's kind of the first question to ask. The second one is, let's pretend that it does. Let's pretend that it does allow you to charge more for your products and it's margin accretive and not destructive. Then the next question is like, are my developers adopting it or are they complaining? And justifiably, I say complaining, and I don't mean it in a derogatory sense, like, oh, developers whine, but developers have a very straightforward goal, which is like, I want to build great software, and I want to get that software running in the cloud. I want to get it to my customers. And if the tools are getting in the way of that, like, they are justified in being frustrated. And, if we come back to what we said earlier, I think where a lot of teams get mixed up is they start to become focused on building the platform, and they start to lose sight of the job to be done, which is, I just need to enable my developers to ship products. And building the platform, you might get it working, but then you don't have a UI, then you don't have a CLI for it, then you don't have an API for it. And like, there's so much, it's such a huge task to get it to a point where your developers can just use it comfortably. And so, to restate that, question number 2, are my developers adopting it or are they complaining about it? And then finally, so let's say that the developers are adopting it, it's working great. Then you have to ask the question like, well, is the platform too complex? And that complexity manifests in the maintenance. A platform is a product if you're building it internally, and every great product needs iterations. It has bugs. It needs documentation. You need to go to version 1 to version 2 to version 3 and all the subversions in between as you learn about your customers' requirements. And so that has a tax in the organization because you have to maintain, you have to manage it, you have to operate it. And then is it performant? If I've glued together a bunch of tools and written a lot of custom code that, only the authors understand, well, if someone leaves, I basically, I have to hope that code doesn't fail. I have to hope that I can make sense of the YAML or whatever scripts that were written. Otherwise, I've got to replatform. And then because it is this brittle thing of all these different solutions and all these different tools glued together, it's gonna break. And then we come back to the job to be done, which is like the first job is to ship software, and the second job is to make sure that's reliable. And if I'm breaking those contracts and my platform is the reason, then I have to ask myself, like, why am I building it? So, to your question around, how do you know if you should build versus buy? It's, well, ask yourself 3 questions. Can I charge more for my products? Do my developers adopt it? And is the platform is it too complex and causing overhead for my organization? And, I would say fundamentally, like, we tend to see platform teams in one of 4 states. They're either, building a platform and it's delayed. They've built a platform and it's not been adopted, or they're replatforming and wondering if it'll have the same fate. And then finally, there's the fourth state, which is nirvana, which is you've built a complete platform that requires minimal maintenance, and your developers love it, and it handles 90% of your company's workloads. But I hate to say it, but I've yet to meet the company that's gotten to that state off something they built themselves. And if they're saying they're in group number 4 or state number 4, they're probably lying.
If you are in state number 4, let us know. Raise your hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we take your analogy, I think the only company that comes to my mind and that succeeded in this space was Amazon with AWS, where they decided to build this. It's not a platform, internal product that they then sold as a product, but to your point, it became a product that then generated revenue. And so then the answer to the question 1 is yes, and then the rest might make sense. Jumping on, getting back to developer experience, you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation being the most important point that PaaS and platform solutions should focus on. So at the same time, developer wants this like frictionless experience and deployment, but they also want control. So how do you, what are the attributes in a platform that would strike the balance between this ease of use and the flexibility that developer want?
It's a wonderful question, and I'm glad you said strike the balance, because I think sometimes ease of use and flexibility are presented as trade-offs, and I think that in that context, they're false trade-offs. I think you can have both. And the reason that is, I think most developer platforms are built like they're afraid of developers, right? They're trying to gate power behind abstraction. They're trying to hide primitives behind simple UIs, and they're treating DevOps like some special priesthood. They assume developers can't be trusted with infrastructure. But the best developers don't want less power. They just want more control without the pain. And so I think the core insight that teams should have, and this is the way that we think about it at Northflank, is that infrastructure shouldn't necessarily be abstracted away, although I realize that's a term I've been using over and over again. But realistically, it should be synthesized. And so the entire post-commit experience, building, deploying, running, scaling, observing, should really feel like one system and not a bunch of tools wired together. And I think this is where a lot of platform teams try to, they stub their toe, because the building blocks that they have, the primitives they have are diverse and very low level, and they have to stitch them together. And I think that's whenever people start thinking like, well, can I potentially buy my way out of this problem?
So let's say that one of our listeners is like, okay, I want to get into platform engineering, but there are always like blockers. So what would you say are like the biggest blocker preventing a successful platform rollout, and how would you suggest them to get rid of them?
I think it ends up being cultural, and it really needs to come from the top down. So I think for whatever reason, the industry has also evolved such that buying something versus building is kind of like the less noble outcome, right? And I kind of get it. It's kind of for the purists of the world, it's like just because we can doesn't mean that we should. And I think that a lot of people have that a lot of engineering organizations have that backwards, where it's like, because we can, therefore we should. And so you see companies with very sophisticated engineering teams, they're like, well, we've got the engineers, so therefore we should be building it. And I think that's the wrong cultural mentality. And what teams have to realize is, great software, because your internal platform is it is a software product, right? Where your customer are your engineers. Great software requires savvy product leadership. It requires thousands of iteration cycles. And so taking a DIY approach means rediscovering the insights that emerge from software vendors who are focused on the problems their tools are meant to solve, whose insights are the product of iteration across a multitude of customers and experiments. And so DIY, means reinventing the wheel over and over and over again. And we also must not forget that software vendors have a lot at stake. They have much more at stake, and the market incentives raise the cost of failure. So if you build bad software, you won't survive. And yes, there is bad software, and we all know, we all use it. But we have to trust the market to some extent, which is like, look, the market is going to continue to reward people who are building great products, assuming that markets aren't efficient, there's not monopolies. And we have to trust that, they're going to do a better job at delivering a product than building it ourselves. Because, I'll say that statement, just because we can doesn't mean that we should. And, you run the counterfactual here, and it's like, if I'm going to assign a product manager to this person has to, they got to scope it, they got to document it, and they have to maintain it. And it's a different incentive structure. Like if I'm a product manager working on something, and I don't need to be like too derogatory here, but I'm a product manager working on an internal tool, I can probably thrive in mediocrity, right? Because I'm graded on whether I ship the tool, not necessarily on whether people quote unquote buy it. Because there is no efficient market inside of companies. Products are mandated. It's kind of like the definition of a monopoly. You get one tool to choose from, and without that market incentive, people are going to build bad products, and bad software evolves from bad product management. We shouldn't expect companies to suddenly develop visionary product abilities for their various software requirements internally. So I think I might have gotten off track there just a little bit, but kind of the point to the block or the things that people have to overcome really just to come from the top down, which is like, look, just because we can build it doesn't mean we should. No, we really should be thinking to ourselves, like, is this the right thing for our business? Is this going to help us, better serve our customers and charge more for our products and build greater products by investing in this thing? Or is it going to be margin destructive and potentially put us in a big hole that we can't climb out of, or that we would struggle to climb out of?
Jumping off some of the things you said, I've heard teams basically bypassing the process that platform team had put in place because they were so bad. And they were kind of, deploying kind of in secret, in the bag. And that's, when you know that you didn't do it right. And I can see, this non-monopoly like situation happening within a company. It's like a dictatorship in some time. And especially if you invest time and money in building this platform engineering team and you realize that everything you invested is not working, that can be frustrating and perhaps put some of the execs' reputation or job at stake. So looking ahead, what trend do you see shaping the current and next generation of HiDP?
Well, I just came back from KubeCon, and I spoke with like hundreds of platform engineering leaders and DevOps practitioners, and had a lot of conversations around the developer platform. And it was there was like a uniform tone among everyone that I was speaking with, which is like, this is just not working, right? They're in a situation where their engineering leadership is coming to them and say like, hey, I need you to do more with less. And they already have an impossible task, the forlorn hope that I mentioned earlier, which is to deliver an internal developer platform where it might be, 1 to 2 platform engineers serving, 50, up to 50 engineers, right? Like that is an absolute impossible task, right? And so you talk to them like, hey, how's it going? They're like, well, the Argo and, the GitHub Actions and all the things that we're gluing together with the Helm and the Terraform. And if I ever have to look at it line of YAML again, I'm going to kill myself. You're like, that sucks, right? Like I feel for you. Like that's really tough. And people are really starting to ask themselves like, hey, is there a better option? Like, can I actually buy something here? And realistically, the answer is finally yes. I mean, fortunately, there are enough standards thanks to Kubernetes, the cloud native ecosystem, and through containers that you can actually start to productize the solution and start to bring together all the different tools that make up the post-commit lifecycle. And I think that the thing that is we should also talk about that isn't really spoken about enough is the fact that a platform, like a true platform that you can purchase and allows you to standardize how you're deploying your workloads to the cloud, regardless of whatever cloud that is actually going to allow you to unlock the full capabilities and the promise of managed Kubernetes, right? The promise whenever we got Kubernetes was like, hey, we're going to make infrastructure a commodity and your workloads are going to be portable between clouds. The reality is much different than that, right? You go to any engineering leader, any team, and you say, okay, which cloud are you using? Whether it's on-prem or managed, and they'll name something, right? And we'll say, okay, if you woke up tomorrow and said, I want my workloads running in the other cloud, and asked if that was possible, they'd be like, oh, no way, right? And you're like, well, aren't you using Kubernetes? They're like, yeah, of course I am. they're like, well, but why, why aren't your workloads portable? And they kind of laugh at you, right? And of course, it's not serious because the clouds have created a lock-in so that there's such that they have gravity for your workloads in their infrastructure. But that kind of like, that took the power out of the people, right? Because the people just want to be able to say like, hey, I just want to go to the best infrastructure provider in this region for the cost, for the performance. And I think the promise of the next generation of like developer platforms that you can buy is exactly that, which is you define your deployment path once, and you define it around your workloads and not the infrastructure itself. Like, yeah, that's a whole other conversation. And that deployment path is consistent across clouds. It allows that true portability that didn't otherwise exist up until now. And of course, like I'm talking about this in a bring your own cloud context, which, if we are able to realize this, dream, if companies do embrace this, like we will get to the future state that we all, kind of hope for, which is the cloud becomes a commodity, right? Like the infrastructure should become a commodity. And it should be the platform layer that enables that, and enables my organization to do the job to be done, which is just, I want to get my workloads running in the cloud. I want to ship software.
So we want to give power back to the people, right? So
power back to the people.
So if people want to join your fight and find you on the internet, Chase, where can they find you?
I love that. So I'm on like X. It's just Chase Roberts with no vowels, but I'd say probably the easiest way to get my attention. So I'm with a company called Northflank. You can email me, Chase, at northflank.com. That's NORTHFLANK.com. And happy to chat with anyone about this. And then of course I'm on LinkedIn as well. And I accept most requests that are generated by an automated AI bot.
Amazing. Chase is also a great cycler. So if you are cycling, you might see him on the road. Chase, thank you.
I don't know if great is the right word, but I do cycle. So come hang out in San Francisco. We'll go climb some hills.
Amazing. Well, I might take you on that. Thank you for coming on the show, Chase. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.